Welcome to Hubbard Helps, a program that spotlights the people and organizations making a difference in Chicago. Now, here's your host, Rachel Kelso.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Steve Donor and his son Richard started playing guitar together 10 years ago, but their passion for the instrument quickly changed into a fantastic charitable effort. The two co-founded Donor Designs, an organization in which the father-son duo build themed guitars to benefit national charities, such as the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, and the United Services Organizations. Here to talk all about it is Donor Designs co-founder Steve Donor. Steve, thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, Rachel. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So you're an accountant and your son is an engineer by day, but you're guitar designers by night. And this is honestly one of the most interesting charitable efforts that I have ever seen or heard of. So take us back to the beginning. What inspired you to start customizing guitars, and how long have you and your son been teaming up to create them?
Well, first of all, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. We started playing guitar about 10 years ago. Like a lot of people that take up guitar, it's pretty common to start, making some upgrades and whatnot, modifications to that beginner instrument. And for some, that's just kind of a means to an end. But for others, like Richard and I, it almost becomes a hobby and an end in itself, where you kind of want to just keep going deeper, and instead of just replacing a few parts on a purchased guitar, you go further and further into buying bodies and necks and basically, building from scratch. So that's kind of how we got into building. Initially, it was just, we were just doing stuff for our own use. We started playing around 2010, and about 2 years later, we started, the guitars start stacking up, and, my wife starts asking about, how many guitars do you need and things like that. You start asking yourself, what are we going to do with these if we want to keep building?
Now, your most recent project was the Time Machine bass guitar, and that includes a flux capacitor, which is inspired by the hit 80s film Back to the Future. It looks really, really cool, by the way. And Donor Designs fittingly passed it along to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. Are you able to say how much the foundation got for the Time Machine bass, and how much do your other guitars normally go for at auction?
It was in the thousands. We try not to talk too much about the prices for individual instruments, because it can be all over the board. Sometimes you do surprisingly well, and other times they're a bit of a disappointment just because of the circumstances of who happens to be there and that sort of thing. But it seems like around $2,000 typically is a good target and kind of the sweet spot. Richard got philosophical at one point on one of the guitars. We were a little bit disappointed in how much it brought in, and he said, well, I guess $2,000 or pick a number, $5,000 is a lot of money for a decoration, which is what it is for a lot of people. It's a donation ultimately to a good cause.
Now, you've also designed Air Force and Army guitars, a NASA-themed guitar, and an aircraft carrier bass guitar, which all benefited different charities like Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. When you and your son build these guitars and design them, do you already have a charity in mind that they'll go up for auction for, or do you choose the charity after you come up with the design?
We try to do it afterwards with the one that was inspired by Back to the Future, the Time Machine. There was an obvious connection to the Michael J. Fox Parkinson's Foundation, so we really from the beginning on that one wanted to donate that to the Fox Foundation. What we typically do is a lot of these big national charities like Make-A-Wish, for example, they have a annual fundraiser gala, black tie event in downtown Chicago and in other major cities. And when we're done with the guitar, we just make the arrangements with the charity. We give them the guitar and some promotional materials they can use to facilitate the auction, and they take care of selling it. Our goal would be typically to make the commitment after the guitar's done and to have it go to, a big national charity.
The guitars are truly so artistic. Are they functional as well? Can they be played? Or are they mainly just for show?
No, in every case, they are completely playable, and we use really pretty high-quality components. In a way, it's a little bit of a shame if somebody buys it just to hang on their wall because they're excellent instruments in their own right. That was one of the things on the Time Machine, even though it went for a little bit less than we had hoped. At least that one went to a guy who's a bass player. He's in a couple of bands, and that's really cool to see it going to somebody that's actually going to play it.
I would venture to say that many people would sell these for personal profit before giving them up for charity. So what led you and your son to use them to raise money for such worthy causes?
We do enjoy the build process, and you do have to get rid of them eventually as they start to stack up. So I can remember years ago I posted on in an amateur guitar builders forum, I think it was on LinkedIn, and posed the questions to the other amateur builders, what do you do with these things after you're done? A couple of people mentioned charity and giving some of them away, or either to auctions or to friends or whatnot. And so that sort of planted the seed. Started thinking further about that and, to larger charities, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation came to mind because a friend of the family had a daughter who had cancer, and she had a great experience with Make-A-Wish. So, maybe we could build a guitar. Maybe a kid would wish for a guitar, and we could somehow be a part of that. So I contacted Make-A-Wish, and they said, well, it's a great idea, but we'd have to wait for somebody to wish for a guitar. Almost as an afterthought, they said, well, maybe you could consider doing something for one of our auctions. And until then, it didn't even occur to me that somebody like Make-A-Wish would have an auction, but looked into it a little bit more, and they ultimately became the first charity that we donated 2 or 3 guitars now to.
This is Hubbard Helps on Hubbard Radio Chicago. I'm Rachel Kelso. Today we're talking with Steve Donor, co-founder of Donor Designs. Steve and his son Richard build themed guitars that have raised thousands of dollars for major national charities, such as the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, and the United Services Organizations. You and your son complete approximately 1 guitar per year. So what's the start to finish process from designing it to building it to having it ready to go for an auction?
It's a lot of brainstorming initially. Sometimes we would buy the parts right at the beginning, the guitar parts, to make the body and neck and the basic hardware that makes the guitar function, so that we'd have sort of a template to lay out the theme on as opposed to just a cardboard cutout of a guitar. And we really have done it pretty much old school, not with paper and scissors and cardboard and that sort of thing, as opposed to Photoshop. For the simpler ones, where the pick guard, the plastic thing that goes on top of the body, carried a lot of the theme aspects. And then to the extent it's painting, we would kind of do our own stuff in Microsoft Word or Paint or whatever software and cut out paper with scissors and then lay it on the body to get a sense for what it would look like after we actually painted it, and kind of move things around until we're happy with the general appearance. And typically, until the paint's dry, it's still changing because every one is a one-off. It seems like in just about every case, we would make a mistake in some part of the process and say, okay, what can we do here to cover that up and make it look like it was that way from the start? So a lot of creativity that goes into the design process. The Time Machine was different because the big thing there was the flux capacitor, the digital readout for the destination year, and then figuring out how to fit in the circuit boards. And so, we there again did some kind of drawings on paper and laid it on the body, and we ordered some of the parts and lay out the parts on the guitar body to, get a sense for what it would look like. But one of the tough things there was that we couldn't actually start cutting on the body, which is something that I do, the extra routing to sync the, recess things like the display and the flux capacitor into the body. We couldn't really decide on the final layout until all the circuit boards were done, because we had to make sure everything would fit. And we could tell pretty early on that it was going to be a tight fit. 2 of the batteries had to be kind of strapped onto the outside of the body. And there's other things like that we did to some of the wiring runs along the outside of the body that we had to do just to make everything fit. And so we didn't actually get to start cutting and so forth until the design was almost finished.
Art takes time, especially when you're dealing with something as intricate as a musical instrument, and even more especially when you're trying to keep that musical instrument functional. So it's definitely really, really cool, and I understand how it could be very time-consuming. So out of all the guitars that you and your son have built together, what's been your favorite one that you've created?
That would definitely be the Time Machine, and it's hardly even close. That one was so elaborate, and so much of the labor and creativity was with us, with Richard and I, as opposed to, like on the aircraft carrier. I almost have to give half credit on that one to Extreme Creations, because they made the very elaborate pickguard and they did the inlays on the neck to make the neck into a runway. But plus, I think just the final product made the biggest splash for sure. That one forced Richard and I to kind of work together quite a lot more than we did on some of the others, just because the electronics were fundamental to that one. In fact, if he wasn't in engineering school at the time, we couldn't have built it at all.
Now, finally, what is the best part about working with your son on the instruments that you both love to play?
Well, it's not probably, I'm sure it is the fact that it gives the two of us something to do together and talk about. And that's been the case for about 10 years, even before we started with the charity builds, because we started playing at the same time, and all the tinkering and so forth we did initially was something that we did together quite a bit. And as he got into high school, typically, like a lot of kids, they pull back a little to kind of become their own person. And, sometimes it's hard to break through that as a parent. So it gave us that connection point, which, for some people that's fishing and sports of various kinds. And for us, it was building guitars.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for taking the time to talk with me today. And I am just so in awe at what you guys are doing. And it's such a cool idea and something so unique that you don't see people doing, let alone doing it to raise money for charity. But thank you again for joining us. And I know you're probably going to take a little bit of a break after the Time Machine, but I wish you and your son the best of luck on your next project.
Thank you, Rachel. It was a pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
Our guest this morning has been Steve Donor, co-founder of Donor Designs. For more information or to donate, visit donordesigns.org. That's DONER designs.org. And that's our show this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Rachel Kelso. Hubbard Helps is powered by Hubbard Radio, making a difference in Chicago.